For instance, Charles Segal, Bernard Manifold, and Charles Chiasson have noticed striking parallels between the stories of Croesus in Herodotus's Histories and Oedipus in Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus. In this paper, Doris and I hope to develop our understanding of the connectedness between the two kings by comparing them against fortune and fate and responsibility. We examine each theme in the Croesus Logos first, then explore its use in the OT, thereby aiming to provide a nuanced view of the general affinities between the two authors, particularly their conception of happiness and the relative importance given to divine and human causation in shaping an individual's fortune. Secondly, in offering a close assessment of the language connected with our chosen themes, we hope to illustrate how, despite working in different genres, Herodotus and Sophocles employ similar techniques, notably through the use of different vocalizations, to engage their audiences and subtly undercut their characters' sense of themselves. So, the first theme is a cornerstone of both narratives, and that is of being ignorant and learning too late. From the outset of the Croesus story, Herodotus makes it known that as the king of Lydia, Croesus will be punished for the crimes of his ancestor. For while the oracle at Delphi sanctioned the kingship of his progenitor Gyges, it was added that the sons of Heracles will have vengeance on Gyges' posterity in the 5th generation, that is, in Croesus' lifetime. Even before he has been properly introduced into the narrative, then, readers are already informed that a great Tissis will be exacted against Croesus for the crimes of Gyges. Moreover, the narratorial comment that of this utterance the Lydians and their kings took no account until it was fulfilled, which implicitly includes Croesus himself, underlines from an early stage the significance of being ignorant and learning too late as explanatory motifs in Herodotus' account of his political undoing. The idea of Croesus' ignorance also appears in his dialogue with the Athenian Solon, where Croesus hopes to be designated the most prosperous of men, Olbiotatos. Unfortunately for him, Solon conceives the term olbios to denote a lasting, blissful prosperity, rather than, as he does, in terms of material wealth. For having listened to the wise advisor, Solon's extended warnings, Croesus nonetheless seems to consider his prosperity invulnerable. Therefore, he brutally dismissed him, that is Solon, considering the speech to be of no account. He thought him to be very ignorant, amathes, he who disregarded present successes and called upon people to look to the end of all affairs. Just as Croesus and other Lydians had taken no account of the Pythia's prior warning to his ancestor Gyges, here the king sends Solon away without paying heed to his advice, regarding him even as ignorant, amathes. The irony of calling the famous sophistes Solon ignorant may already be noted by some amongst Herodotus' audience, but will be felt fully by all when the formerly materially successful Lydian king sits atop the burning pyre at 186, now a prisoner of Cyrus. And strikingly, just as with the Lydians and their king's collective amnesia about the prophecy concerning Gyges' progeny, this willful dismissal of Solon's sage advice is introduced via narratorial summary, which directly informs the reader's the history's external audience that the advisor fell short in gratifying the king, who thus sent him away. In both instances, the narrator equips readers to assess characters' assumptions against a wider set of perspectives. Herodotus returns to Croesus' ignorance and late learning near the close of the narrative, as the Pythia belabors the point on behalf of Apollo that he failed to consult the oracle sufficiently on which empire he would destroy, and that Cyrus was born of a mixed birth and hence could be considered a mule. On both counts, the god charges Croesus as uncomprehending, and upon learning the god's response, Herodotus reports that when Croesus heard it, he realized that the mistake, hamartida, was his own and not the god's, phrasing which chimes with the narrator's own earlier judgment that Croesus marched into Cappadocia mistaking, hamarton, the import of the oracle being that which advised he would destroy a great empire. So at last, Croesus is reported to appreciate matters that he had previously ignored or misconstrued. But crucially, this comes after the complete disaster that has befallen his kingdom. His understanding of what has occurred at this late point does not in any way obviate or lessen his significant demise.
Just as Croesus's calamity is foretold in the Gyges oracle, so Oedipus's destiny is predicted by prophecies. He will kill his father Laius and marry his mother Jocasta, even though at the time he is unaware of their identity. There is a narratorial voice in tragedy, but many, maybe most spectators, would be familiar with the myth of the Elapticid house and would quickly notice Oedipus's ignorance, especially since Sophocles heightens it with dramatic irony. At the beginning of the play, the king finds out from Apollo's oracle to Creon that Thebes is suffering from the plague because its citizens failed to search for the murderer of Laius. Oedipus begins his investigation believing that he has no personal connection with the crime. I know, since I have heard about it, for I never saw him, as Adon, he tells Creon. The spectator familiar with the myth knows that he is wrong. He obviously did see his father when he killed him. The irony functions in a similar way to the narrator's comment in Herodotus. It suggests that the drama is about Oedipus' learning process, his path from ignorance to knowledge. Sophocles further emphasizes the theme of ignorance by combining irony with repeated metaphors of blindness and vision, darkness and light. They are particularly prominent in the scene with Tiresias. Oedipus begs him to help him in his search for Laius' murderer, but the seer refuses, knowing that what he has gained from his mantic art can only bring pain. Oedipus reacts angrily, saying that if the blind prophet happened to have sight, blepon, he could be suspected of having committed the murder himself. Although this accusation is understandable on the level of the dramatic action, the knowing spectator realizes that Oedipus is wrong, and that in reality it is he who lacks sight. Later in the scene, Tiresias discloses to Oedipus that he is Laius' murderer. Like Croesus, who dismissed the advice of the wise Solon, Oedipus rejects the revelations of the, by his own admission, authoritative Tiresias, and mistakenly describes himself as a man who sees the light, ora phos, whereas he says that the seer is nourished by a single night, mias nyktos. Finally, in his prophecy of the future, Tiresias tells Oedipus that he will be blind, to phlos, from seeing clearly, dedorkotos. Oedipus cannot yet comprehend the riddling language, and not unlike Croesus, who judged Solon to be ignorant, as Jan said, Amatheus dismisses the seer's words as foolish, mora. There is a final cluster of words to do with seeing, when Oedipus explains why he has blinded himself. And here they highlight the theme of learning too late. While Jocasta is able to escape her new reality by committing suicide, this is not possible for her parricidal son husband. For I do not know with what eyes, Omesin, I could have looked on Blepon, my father, when I went to Hades, nor again on my unhappy mother. Oedipus's true vision prevents him from finding relief even in death. In life too, the sight, opsis, of his children's siblings can only bring pain to his eyes, ophthalmos. Oedipus has finally learned Tiresias' lesson. As with Croesus, his ignorance has turned into self-knowledge, but his new insight has led to the annihilation of his very existence. Both Herodotus and Sophocles then emphasize their protagonist's prolonged transition from a state of ignorance to one of understanding. It is central to both stories that Croesus and Oedipus only become aware of their miscomprehension at the point of complete ruin, when it is too late to change the course of events. In addition, Herodotus and Sophocles play on the juncture between their characters' limited knowledge and the audience's much wider understanding of events. Herodotus deploys narratorial comments to which the characters are not privy, but that speak directly to his readers. Sophocles uses irony and metaphors to communicate with the spectator over the heads, so to speak, of the stage figures.
Moving on, the second idea that pervades both the OT and the histories is the notion that human affairs are inherently mutable. The fates of Oedipus and Croesus serve as paradigms for humankind, which is in a state of constant flux. Having set out the general principle that nothing remains fixed regarding human prosperity, eudaimonion, Herodotus begins his programmatic excursus on Croesus, the first barbarian we know of to subjugate the Greeks by taking tribute from them. Over the course of the narrative, Herodotus will make several interventions, both in his own voice and that of others, to demonstrate how Croesus's career reflects the ephemeral nature of human prosperity. As we saw above, Solon's reflections on the pinnacles of human happiness are met with incredulity and consternation on Croesus' part. When the monarch asks him to outline what he therefore makes of his own prosperity, Solon responds, without the use of flattery, by promulgating his views on human misfortune. He begins by remarking that the divine is entirely jealous, panthoneron, and prone to disturb humanity's lot. Next, he emphasizes the long time, the macrochrono that people live, enough for them to see and endure many hardships. For this reason, he cautions, the whole of mankind is chance. The term symphorere, which can be translated variously as chance or misfortune, proves especially arresting in the wider context of the Croesus Logos, of course, namely when the Lydian meets a terrible symphorere after his son Attis is murdered accidentally by his Xenos Adrastus. There are yet more lessons for Croesus to learn from this disquisition on happiness. Solon continues by comparing the lot of rich and unblessed people, anobios, and those with much more moderate means, but who are fortunate, eutoukios. He argues that those with much more modest means are better off than those who are very wealthy, homega plusios, in a multitude of ways, protected by their good fortune, their eutoukia, their good looks, euerdies, etc. He advises then, wait until a person ends their life, teluteser, and call them not blessed, obion, but fortunate, eutoukia. It is these observations on one being unable to discern true happiness until the end of any individual's life, which lies at the heart of Solon's opaque warning to the king. After Solon departs Sardis, Herodotus writes that a great vengeance, a nemesis, seized Croesus, as seems likely because he considered himself to be obiotatos, the most happy of men. The narrator therefore makes the connection explicit to readers concerning the death of Attis in the succeeding chapters and Croesus's continued disproportionate sense of his own prosperity. This appraisal of the misfortune that strikes the king demonstrates not only Herodotus's aligning himself with Solon, or even, to quote Charles Chiasson, supplementing the Athenians' focus on divine agency, but also underlines that the Athenian had made an insufficient impact in his dealings with Croesus. Herodotus makes no signal that he was mindful of Solon's admonitions on the mutability of human fortune until much later, that is, near the end of this entire excursus. Indeed, it is at that dramatic moment when he is bound in human chains and seated atop a burning pyre that Croesus utters 3 times the name Solon. Having made extensive inquiries on Cyrus's part, Croesus declares the Athenian to be he who I would have preferred over great wealth to come to words with, all rulers. So at last, he begins to recognize the wisdom espoused by Solon, and he ironically dismisses of being of inferior value the very great wealth, the megalon chematon, that he had previously held in such high esteem. The subsequent explanation of his meeting with Solon to Cyrus at 186.5 recapitulates the broad sweep of Herodotus' own narrative at 129-33, centering as it does on Solon's gazing at his wealth, Oldon, and how things turned out just as Solon had said. He concludes then that he, Solon, was speaking not only more to himself, but to all humanity, and most of all to those supposing themselves to be prosperous, obius. So at the end, at this moment of near death, Croesus's recognition that human prosperity is at best a transitory thing converges with Solon's paradigm. He realizes that it is any individual who, as he had done, considers themselves to be obios, that is in most need of the wise advisors, caveats on looking to the end of all things. Although he saves himself from death by eliciting the pity of his conqueror Cyrus, the fallen king undoubtedly experiences a great reversal of fortune in the loss of his kingdom and wealth.
Like Croesus, Oedipus is at the height of success and the action begins. Unlike Croesus, however, who equates happiness with being wealthy, the focus on the play is on his public and private life. The priest of Zeus, who appeals for help on behalf of the plague-ridden city, calls him first of men and best of mortals, since he rescued Thebes from the Sphinx and has always kept the city straight, orthosai and orthon. He reigns in harmony with Jocasta and Creon, each of whom has an equal share in power, Ison and Isumai. Oedipus also has the support of the wider community, represented on stage by the chorus of elders. They speak freely, and he accepts their advice, even letting his brother-in-law go, despite believing him to be his would-be murderer. This freedom extends to Tiresias and Creon, even when Oedipus thinks that they are traitors. Faced with a furious sovereign, the seer can, and I quote, at least lay claim to the equal right, existotion, to answer back on equal terms, is. And Creon can similarly stand up to Oedipus, telling him that, and I quote again, in reply to the things you said, listen on equal terms, is, to me. Only a king who believes that his position is secure can rule in this manner. In his personal life too, Oedipus is at the height of success, or at the height of happiness. At the beginning of the play, Jocasta and Creon are not only co-rulers, they are also his friends. Creon is the trusted one, my friend from the start, and Oedipus's relationship with Jocasta is even closer. He does not hide anything from her, not even the awful oracles foretelling parricide and incest, or his killing of the old man with his entourage near Delphi. Altogether then, it is unsurprising that both the chorus and the palace messenger judge Oedipus's life before his downfall as exemplary in happiness, eudaimonia, and bliss, olbos, the very words Herodotus uses in the Croesus Logos. Spectators, however, know that this bliss will not last. For Croesus, the vast wealth, Plutos, he amassed in his treasury, and the amazement his visitors usually express are proof of his happiness. In the OT, wealth is not emphasized in the same way, but it is a background motif which, because of its connection with Oedipus's false suspicion, indirectly contributes to his eventual ruin. When Oedipus is told by Creon that Laius was killed by robbers, he immediately assumes that a wider conspiracy must have been behind such a daring act, and that the murder was carried out with the help of money, xyn arguro. Later, when he makes his accusation of treachery against Creon, he mocks him, saying that he would not have succeeded without wealth, annu pluto, since kingship can only be won with a large group of supporters and money, chremasin. Oedipus also accuses Tiresias of plotting against him for the sake of money, or rather profit, kerdesin. And the seer eventually prophesies that Oedipus will end up a beggar, tochos, rather than wealthy, plusio. Wealth, though not the main goal for Oedipus, still plays an important role. Like Croesus, he will eventually understand that wealth and kingship are ephemeral. Both in the history and the OT, it is the passage of time, chronos, and the vagaries of chance that ultimately prove to be the reason for the instability of human life. The terms used by both by Herodotus and Sophocles are symphora and tuche, as Jan already said. In the OT, their meaning varies according to the context. They can have neutral, positive, or negative associations, and are therefore variously translated as event, chance, luck, good fortune, or misfortune. Initially in the OT, symphora and tuche implies something positive. The priest praises Oedipus for the events, symphorais, of his life. That is, Oedipus's rescue of Thebes and his subsequent marriage to the widowed queen. The king must now replicate his good fortune, tuchen, and end the plague in the city. Quickly, however, the context gives the words ironic undertones. In his proclamation to the Thebans, Oedipus claims that it was his fate, tuche, that caused Laius's demise. Unlike the known spectator, he does not realize that he is talking about his own fate, a fate that has made him into a parricide. Tiresias employs symphora in a deliberately enigmatic manner when he asserts that Oedipus will find no pleasure in the event, symphorae, since Oedipus does not appreciate that the event is the revelation that he is the murderer of Laius. This only makes sense to the audience. At the height of his illusion, when Jocasta has already worked out the truth, Oedipus calls himself the son of chance, haida tes tuches. He will be proud of his origin, even if it turns out to be the child of a servant in Laius's household, since chance marked him out both as small and great. Unlike Herodotus and Sophocles' audience, Oedipus and Croesus only see the upward movement of fortune. Once Oedipus's deeds have been revealed, symphora and tuche are only used in the negative sense. The chorus calls Oedipus wretched in his bad fortune, symphoras, and the man on whom has come a great billow of terrible misfortune, symphoras again. Then they now see the king as a paradigma, for the whole of humanity. Happiness, eudaimonias, they conclude, is only temporal. Someone may appear to be happy, eudaimonos, but in actual fact, nothing can be deemed blessed, makarizo. This, of course, is the very essence of Solon's advice to Croesus. The O2 concludes with a choral observation that almost exactly mirrors one of the major dictums of the Herodotean Solon, one that Francesca already mentioned in her talk. Someone who is mortal should look to the final day, teleutaian hemeran, considering no one blessed, albizain, until he has crossed the limit of life without suffering grief. Many critics dismiss the final 7 lines of the play as an interpolation, but the poet who composed them must have wanted to reinforce the idea of the instability of human life, which, as we have seen, is one explanation for the misfortune that befalls both Croesus and Oedipus. This ending, which contains something akin to a quotation from the histories, is the most emphatic affirmation of the close thematic and verbal affinities between the two texts. Both Herodotus and Sophocles' narratives then demonstrate the fundamental significance of chance overturning individuals' good fortune, and this tendency is particularly notable in the lives of powerful people who think that their situation is stable and secure and unlikely to deteriorate with time. Croesus and Oedipus alike fail to realize that there is a difference between luck and true blessedness, and learn about the mutability of human life in a particularly powerful and cruel way when they experience a great calamity, ate megalen in the history and ate in OT, or even ates agriais, if the line in the 4th stasimon is correct.
Finally, in charting the tragic reversals in fortune of Croesus and Oedipus, it is important to examine not only the role played by fate in these two individuals' demise, but also the personal responsibility that they must both bring to bear. In the case of Croesus, as noted earlier, Herodotus records an oracle that predicted a thesis, a vengeance, would be exacted upon the Lydian dynasty in the 5th generation. And at the close of the Logos, the Delphic priestess relates that Loxias wished to visit a disaster upon the sons of Croesus, but fate, Moiran, had it that he himself must pay for the mistake, the hamartida of Gyges. In addition, Herodotus precedes the entire account by remarking on the impermanent nature of any city's fortunes and on his understanding, epistamenos, that humanity necessarily experiences only a finite amount of good fortune, eudaimonia. A corollary of these observations is that human beings are unable to prevent the inevitable rise and fall of nations that will take place over a lengthy time period. In these ways, Croesus is profoundly inhibited in the Herodotean narrative, unable to withstand the larger forces at work that are set on the collapse of his kingdom. And yet, a moral explanation that Croesus is personally responsible for the tragedy that has befallen him is evinced at several points too in Herodotus's account. In his communications with different oracle centres, notably Delphi, the Lydian displays a striking inability to interpret oracular communications. His initial appeal to the divine is one pivoted towards his testing of oracle sites to ascertain, at least from his perspective, whether they convey the truth. He does this with a view to sending again in order to inquire about an expedition against Persia, one of several points at which Herodotus notes his expansionist agenda, itself a marker of Croesus's own agency in the events that unfold in Herodotus's narrative. Not only is Croesus's test one that inverts the traditional Greek model of seeking advice from oracles, but Herodotus's account also suggests that he falls short in appreciating what proves to be oracles laden with both a surface and hidden meaning. Indeed, Croesus continues to fall short in apprehending the nuances of oracles, specifically when he famously misinterprets the oracle that foretells he will destroy a great empire if he marches against the Persians. He never contemplates that this elliptical message, referred to by Herodotus later as a kresmu kibdelu, a phrase that we've met before with Antony's paper, that this elliptical message could imply the curtailment of his own dominion, nor does he seek further clarification from the oracle as to whose empire would be destroyed, something pointed out by the god at 191.4, who also refers there to Croesus being Aetios, responsible for the loss of his power. This message is also reinforced by Croesus and the narrator. After Croesus heard the god's message at 191, he accepted the error, 10 hamartida, was his and not that of the god, a position that chimes too with Herodotus's earlier assessment that in his mistaking the import of the oracle, hamarton to kresmu, Croesus marched his army against Persia. This set of miscommunications with the oracle surfaces then as one of the chief ways in which Herodotus shows that Croesus was responsible for precipitating his own downfall. Beyond his interpretation of oracles, Croesus's dealings with the divine elicits a level of readerly alarm in other ways too. After he is spared death by Cyrus, he remains muddled about the reasons for his comeuppance. Herodotus writes that Cyrus considers him a theophile and a good man, and he asks what drove him to march his army as an enemy of Persia, yet Croesus's answer is less than pious. I did these things to your good fortune, your eudaimonia, and to my own bad fortune, kakodaimonia. The god of the Greeks was responsible, Aetios, for these things, stirring me up to wage war. So at this late stage, he continues to assign the Greek gods as the cause of his ill fortune. Shortly after the pyre scene, he even sends some emissaries to Delphi, asking the god if he felt no shame in inciting him and convincing him he would capture an empire. Once more, Herodotus signals Croesus's lack of humility in his dealings with the oracle, for the Lydian emissaries were also required to ask whether it was customary for the Greek gods to practice ingratitude, acharistoisi. The reproach he exhibits to the god suggests a lack of self-knowledge and introspection on his part, to the extent that many of Herodotus's readers might well be surprised by Loxias's rather benign reply, in which the god does not chastise the king, for asserting that he lacked gratitude for the substantial donations made at Delphi. In consideration of his character, Croesus is clearly a mild ruler for much of Herodotus' narrative, not least in his kind treatment of Adrastus, both before and after he accidentally slays Attis. Indeed, following Attis's death, he tells Adrastus that he does not hold him responsible, Aetios, for the accidental murder of his son, except inasmuch as you did it involuntarily, Aeakon. But there are other passages that nevertheless point to a less than moderate character profile. In his dealings with Solon, he proves to be dismissive and decidedly lacking in self-awareness. For having heard about Tellus and Cleobus and Beton, Herodotus writes that Croesus became incensed, spurk-faced, and that he jibed him for considering our prosperity, hemetera eudaimonia, as nothing compared to that of private individuals. Not only this, but he sent Solon away, thinking him this ignoramus amathes. It is important to note too that final enigmatic, rather ugly postscript to the Croesus Logos concerning the king's half-brother Pantaleon. The particularly brutal treatment directed against his rival claimant to the Lydian throne, that is death by carding, offers a shocking and fresh reading on his character that forces audiences to reassess the existing image that has been developed of a somewhat foolish but relatively moderate individual who exercises caution as he looks to expand his empire. It is striking to note in this context too a stark juxtaposition with Adrastus, who first introduced himself to the Lydian as the murderer of his brother, unwilling against myself. Herodotus permits no such lack of intent on Croesus's part. He violently destroys any possible dynastic challenge to his power base.
Oedipus's fate, like that of Croesus, is determined before his birth. As noted earlier, both parricide and incest were foretold in oracles before they are committed. Once the truth has been revealed, not a single stage figure censures Oedipus. Everyone only expresses grief and pity for their king. The palace messenger, who announces Oedipus's entry after his self-blinding, warns the Thebans that they will see such a sight, and I quote, as will drive to pity even a man who hates him. And both he and the Choriotes stress that his crimes were committed unwittingly, akonta, the same word used in the histories for Adrastus, as Jan just said. Even Creon, who has every reason to be angry with Oedipus, specifically mentions that he has not come to reproach him. On the story plane, Oedipus cannot be blamed for a destiny, Moira, known to Apollo even before his birth. As we have seen throughout this analysis, however, the OT also operates on another plane, that of the knowing spectator, and several stage figures refer to the need for retribution prior to the discovery of the truth. At the beginning of the play, Oedipus himself talks about Laius's murder as the ancient guilt, aetias, and Creon says that violent vengeance has to be exacted on the killers, heri timorein. Tiresias, whose voice has even greater authority, speaks of the crimes in moralistic terms. The king is the unholy polluter of this land. He is in an evil plight, and his relationship with his dear ones is most shameful. The spectator's view of Oedipus's deeds is shaped by the way they are perceived on the level of the story. Since they already know the identity of the perpetrator, their main interest is likely to be the manner in which the crimes were committed and where the responsibility for them lies. In many ways, Oedipus is presented as an ideal ruler. He is compassionate, intelligent, and determined to find the truth. It is precisely these qualities, however, that also make it possible for the destiny foretold by Apollo to be fulfilled. First, Oedipus could have ignored the fellow banqueteer who disputes that the Corinthian king Polybus is his father. Instead, he questions the royal couple. Although he's initially cheered by their angry reaction, the mere possibility that the allegation may be correct is constantly stealing up on him. he must know the truth. Confronted with Apollo's terrible oracle, he makes the same error of judgment as Croesus. He only hears the surface meaning. He believes that father and mother refers to Polybus and Merope. Both Croesus and Oedipus should have questioned the Pythia further, and in fact the Pythia says that at 191. The Lydian monarch should have inquired which empire will be destroyed if he attacks the Persians, and Oedipus should have asked, "Who are my parents?" Oedipus' second mistake consists in believing that he can solve any problem purely by using his intelligence, and so dismissing Tiresias' prophetic power. Although troubled by the seer's prophecies, when the Corinthian messenger reports Polybus' death, he entirely questions the validity of the prophetic half of the Pythia, and concludes that the oracle that Laius would be killed by his son is worth nothing. Croesus and Oedipus thus display a similar attitude to prophecies. They are cautious in their dealings with them, but feel they can and need to be tested against human knowledge. Oedipus' belief in his superior intelligence leads to more serious flaws. The first is his propensity to draw conclusions too quickly, a trait displayed by Croesus too, who did not reflect on Solon's wisdom and read oracles in a way that best suited his ambitions. Since he is sure that he has not killed his father, he makes several deductions which on the story plane are logical, but on the extra dramatic level will be perceived as incorrect. First, when Tiresias accuses him of being Laius' killer, he quickly assumes that the seer has ulterior motives and is plotting with Creon. A mere probability has become a certainty in Oedipus' mind. Secondly, later when he sees Creon, he gives him little chance to allay his suspicions and swiftly condemns him to death. The penalty is never carried out, but the mere threat acts as a signal to the audience that the just and compassionate king is in danger of becoming a tyrant. In the histories, Croesus showed the brutal side of his personality in his treatment of Pantaleon. In Sophocles, Oedipus' unwarranted condemnation of Creon is equally revealing. Secondly, Oedipus has a tendency to become indignant when challenged, another trait he shares with Croesus, who became irate with Solon. This propensity first comes to the fore when Tiresias' refusal to help quickly drives Oedipus to anger, organeas. But in the course of the play, all the stage figures refer to the king's temper. Even Oedipus himself mentions it, and the audience are shown the vital role it played at the meeting of the three roads. When the old man and the entourage attempt to drive him from the road, Oedipus strikes the driver of the wagon in anger, di orges, slays Laius, who hit him with a goad, and ends up killing them all. He admits that the old man paid an unequal penalty, umen isen etisen. Oedipus commits a crime which goes beyond what was foretold by Apollo, and this shows that, like Creon, he possesses, like Croesus, of course, he possesses true agency. He can and must be held accountable for his actions. Both in Herodotus and Sophocles, there is a moral explanation for the king's misfortunes. After the truth has been revealed, Oedipus, again like Croesus, accepts the responsibility for his deeds. Although no one blames him, he sees himself as the most hated by the gods, abandoned by the gods, impious, impure, stained, and accursed. Through his act of self-blinding, he takes ownership of his crimes. When asked by the chorus which of the gods stirred you up, he replies, it was Apollo, my friends, who accomplished telon, these evil, evil things, these sufferings of mine. But no one but my wretched self, egotlamon, struck my eyes with my own hand, autocher. Although his blindness was foretold by Tiresias, it was not performed unwittingly, akonta, like the parricide and incest, but willingly, Heconta, in accordance with Oedipus's own wish. In the end, the two kings recognise their error of judgment. Croesus acknowledges that Solon was right to advise him to look to the end of all things. Oedipus recognises that Tiresias correctly identified his plight. Both in the histories and the OT, fate and responsibility work hand in hand.
We finish with some conclusions. There are a number of striking parallels between Herodotus' Croesus Logos and Sophocles OT. The storylines echo each other. In both texts, powerful tyrannoi experience complete ruin after ignoring the words of wise men, who warn them of the discrepancy between appearance and truth. Prophecies also play a major role, with the two kings insufficiently appreciating that the language of gods cannot be interpreted like that of mortals. Secondly, there are clear thematic affinities, especially in the conception of human fortune. Both stories offer two parallel, seemingly contradictory explanations for human misfortune. According to one, human life is inherently unstable. Personal culpability or innocence, then, are irrelevant. A moral interpretation, however, is also possible. Although the destinies of Croesus and Oedipus have been foretold, it is their personalities, their weaknesses, and their strengths that make it possible for them to be fulfilled. Human agency and responsibility here play a much greater role. Finally, the two texts, which of course belong to different genres, play on different focalizations. Since the authors and their audiences possess greater knowledge, both discourses have a simpler, surface level and a more complex, deeper plane, which subtly comments on the action and foreshadows what is to come. This manner of composition encourages the audience to get involved in a more analytical manner and allows each individual to interpret the discourse in accordance with their own level of competence. In the end, it is impossible to say with any certainty whether Herodotus and Sophocles influenced each other, but the affinities we have traced seem to represent more than, and I quote Tom, a body of proverbial wisdom to a large extent taken for granted by both Herodotus and his contemporaries. Rather than being chance echoes, they suggest that the two authors may have been more closely connected. Thank you.